Welcome to the CROC Podcast.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here is your host, Dr. E.
Hello, this is Dr. Tommy Anelli, founder and director of Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer. We are a grassroots support organization started in 1999 to assist our patients navigate the complex world of their survivorship, as well as help the oncology community better serve their unique needs by breaking down the walls of traditional medical barriers. I am so pleased that you joined us today as we will be discussing how important it is for our cancer care team to cherish, appreciate, and savor every single patient encounter, no matter how big or how small. Joining me today is our co-host, Angel Santana, whose own inspiration and hope-based podcast, Have Faith, Let It Begin, perfectly supplements our work here on the CROC Podcast. Angel, welcome.
Welcome. Then, it's always a joy to come into the homes of each and every, person that listens to the CROC Nation. Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer is designed for each and every one of you. So always an honor to be here, and I'm excited for today's episode.
Yeah, today's an exciting episode for me because this episode is specifically geared toward me and some of my colleagues who may have lost a bit of focus. And it's just wanted to start by telling myself and everyone else that we are human, that we do sometimes stray from what our ideals are and our goals. And Angel, kind of a funny story. We're going to be talking about savoring each patient encounter and how I may have strayed from that goal. I remember a podcast we did recently with George, who George was a vet and he was a funny guy and humorous. But he was always telling me I always had one foot out the door. And we did a podcast about that as far as, trying to rush an encounter and things. And, I took heed to that and I thanked him for that lesson. But I still felt, recently that I have been sort of losing focus and I wanted to kind of do a self-investigation on it. So what I did was, first of all, I didn't like what I saw. So I was actually trying to critique each of my encounters. And and the CROC Nation knows that my partner, Dr. Gonzalez, for 30 years, 25 years, he retired a few years ago. So I've been picking up the slack and sort of doing his work as well as my work and getting busier and busier, as you would expect. And as a result, it was starting to wear on me and starting to wear me down, especially in the clinic where I was getting more distracted and rushed and stressed. And that's not me. So the first thing I did was recognize the loss of focus. The second thing was I took stock of who I wanted to be or what kind of a healer, what kind of a cancer caregiver did I want to be. And what I determined is what I've always hung my hat on is a few, seminal philosophies. So I've always been very proud of the relationships that I've developed with our survivors. And I've always been proud of the advocacy that I confer for them. And I've always been proud of my 24/7 availability. And I've always been proud of my ability to make difficult concepts comprehensible to the survivor thriver. And I've always been proud of my accessibility and approachability to my patients. And I've always especially been proud on the way I use humor to try to combat fear. And all of these, unique personal philosophies and healing philosophies that I've used over the decades require two signature ingredients. They require time and they require mindfulness. And as I said, I've lost my way, not terribly, but a bit. And this podcast is to put me and any of my colleagues who might feel the same way back on the righteous path. So, Angel, we're going to start with mindfulness. So we have discussed mindfulness on this podcast before, and we're going to start with a definition. Angel, what does mindfulness, the definition of mindfulness, or when you hear the word mindfulness, what does it evoke for you?
That's it. Well, I look at it two different ways, to be very honest with you. So I'm just going to give you the more direct way that I would think, maybe from the, let's say, from the dictionary point of view. Um, I would say more or less it's, how do I put it into words? I would say it's like a state of being present, like aware of one's
Beautiful.
thoughts.
Yeah, it couldn't be any better. And when I look at the definition, it's I'm going to go right from Webster. It's the practice of maintaining a non-judgmental state of heightened or complete awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, or experiences on a moment-to-moment basis. You actually hit it right on the head. And the funny thing about mindfulness, and as I was doing this self-introspection, it's no wonder because God gave me gifts, but one of the gifts He did not give me was mindfulness. My mind goes a million miles per hour. I'm all over the place, and it's tough for me to actually try to achieve mindfulness. And I will say that I am guilty for not practicing it, because mindfulness is not something that you understand in your mind. It's something that you must understand in your heart, and it's a practice that needs to be practiced. And I must say that I have not been doing my homework, and therefore it's no surprise that I've strayed and wandered from that sort of super focused, in the moment interaction with each patient, and sort of been sort of dallying in dream world and all that kind of stuff. So to talk first about thoughts, is your mind going a million miles a second like mine? Are you judgmental? I know that I'm guilty of both of those. These are some of my human traits. We need to slow it down, right? We need to really be in that moment, as Angel so nicely said. The emotions that I feel in myself and I see in the clinic are very, top heavy toward fear and anger. And I see it in our survivor thrivers because they're fearful of their diagnosis and of their disease and of dying. And they're angry that they got this disease. So it's hard for them to stay mindful as well. Our experiences, when you're in nature taking a walk, or when you're having a slice of pizza with your kid, or Angel, you just went to your beautiful daughter's dance recital. Was your head there? Were you there in the moment watching every step she takes? Because, that you're going to blink your eye and she's going to be in college, or she's going to be a mom and she's going to live in another state. Also, my favorite subject, food. When you eat your food, do you just gulp your food, or do you not even taste your food? Another thing that I'm really not good at. Really, you should smell and you should experience and taste, and the texture and the flavors, and every bite, should be an experience. And I can't say that that's the case for me. Your relationships. Are you actively appreciating all of the important people in your life, or do you take them for granted and you're basically just getting through the day and not really appreciating them? You and I were talking about your parents getting older and how you're managing that. It seems that you're focused on them every second that you have with them, and that's mindfulness. So in essence, what I ask myself and I ask my colleagues, are we experiencing life, or are we just letting life pass us by? When we go into a room to complete a visitation with a survivor thriver, we've been entrusted by that patient with a very, very holy and great honor. It's probably the greatest honor that a person can get, and that's the trust that our patients put they basically put their lives in our hands, and that trust is sanctity for sure. And when we enter the room, we are implicitly agreeing to a contract. I would even go so far as saying a sacred covenant between us and the survivor thriver. In essence, Angel, we're agreeing to be mindful. We're agreeing to be prepared. We're agreeing to be professional. We are agreeing to be non-judgmental. We are agreeing to focus entirely on that one patient right in front of you, not the patient that you just left, or the patient you're going to see next, or an important meeting that you have coming up, or on your own comfort or needs. Anything less than that is a breach of your word and a breach of your responsibility. And the second ingredient to fulfill this contract and provide those qualities that I identified in the beginning of the podcast is the investment of time. So we spoke a little bit about mindfulness. Now we're going to talk a little bit about time. I have to be honest with you, Angel. I am fascinated by the concept of time. Time is a concept that beguiles me. I love physics. And when I was young and taking physics, I learned about Einstein's laws of relativity and how a light that I might be looking out into the sky tonight and see a light from a star that may have taken thousands of years to get to my eye, which means that I'm actually looking backwards in time to a time thousands of years ago when something on that star was happening, or something on a planet that was near that star. Or we could even look backwards and see how a light reflected back to another place. If we were to be able to travel on that light beam, we could actually see the cavemen and the dinosaurs and be able to place ourselves. And that whole concept of the space-time continuum and all of Einstein's thoughts are intriguing to me. And time is a fundamental dimension to our existence. It's how we frame ourselves. I just was thinking back about when I was young and I would spend my summers with my cousin in Missouri, or how medical school was my experience, or when I was in high school, or when I was in grammar school, or remembering my father. I know it's a cliche that we use. We say time is the greatest gift. We say that time flies, tempus fugit. We say that, you can blink your eye and your beautiful two children, as I said before, will be in college or afterwards. And again, to our loved ones and to our patients, the greatest gift that we can give to that other person in our human journey is that gift of time. And as a physician and as a healer, our time is non-negotiable. We are conscripted to our patient with time, and this time has to be variable, and it has to be flexible, and it has to be different for each person. It can't be constant, or it can't be rigid. These doctors' offices, or these big practices where they require their doctors to spend 10 minutes, or they have to punch the clock when they go into a room to see a patient. That's not what I think the ideal is, and that's not what today's podcast is. It's actually the opposite. And each patient not only deserves all the time that they need to feel safe, to feel engaged and empowered. They need to feel aware and cognizant of their disease, of their treatments, and they are entitled to this time. I don't use the word entitlement much, and I kind of hate entitlement and people who feel entitled. But in this case, our survivor thrivers are entitled to our focus, mindfulness, and our time. And I really don't remember, Angel, exactly that moment that I realized that I was beginning to stray from this directive. I can't say that if it was gradual or if it was sudden, but when I saw it, it really struck me like a lightning bolt. And I really thank George for that podcast. He sort of gifted to us. We kind of channeled it through God to provide it for our CROC podcast, about really being focused and putting the time into each visitation. And I noticed, again, this loss of focus, this mental multitasking. My mind would be all over the place. Our smart watches, we have these smart watches that when you get a message or a text, it beeps. The cell phone, beeps, and like there's a magnet, like our eyes, we don't want to move our eyes away from our survivor thrivers, but our eyes are starting to stray to that smartphone or to our watch. That 1 foot out the door, quote unquote. Thank you, George. The impatience we have now with patients who ask a lot of questions, like you go in and thinking it's a really straightforward, slam, bam, thank you, ma'am kind of case. And sometimes the patients are not that. Sometimes they need super amounts of time and explanation, even though you think it might be simple, it may not be simple to them. There's a frustration we have with patients who we talked about circular conversations where you take the time and you actually explain things perfectly. And then they ask a question as if they didn't hear a word that you said, and you start getting frustrated. I have checklists. When I talk to a patient, did I tell them what their stage is? Did I tell them what their prognosis is? Did I tell them about the natural history of their cancer, the ones that they have? Did I tell them about their treatments? Did I tell them about their side effects? Did I do enough teaching? Did I execute a really good consent? Again, another module we did was on informed consent. Did I ask them if they were satisfied with the information that they received at that consultation? And did I ask them if they wanted a second opinion? And these are my checklists. And I noticed that I started to ignore my checklists. And lastly, in a sort of an intolerance to the difficult patients, the ones that are very hard, they're unreasonable, entitled, and again, we said survivor thrivers should not have to feel that they should be given that baggage of being entitled, but sometimes the entitlement requires some boundaries, and I've noticed my intolerance to that. So basically, I've had that global loss of mindfulness, and I did surrender to sort of resentment, and it was a resentment and a greedy protection or protectiveness of my time. And the good news, Angel, is that we can find redemption, and we can find a return back to our professional values and our professional vows through the following 6 steps. So the first thing, which we talked about a lot today, was recognition. You need to recognize that you're changing and why you're changing. So I noticed that I was starting to stray, starting to lose focus. And, and I know it was because I'm, basically doing the work of 2 people. So I know why. Number 2 is that we could do remediation of our bad habits by, again, being mindful and putting in the time. The next thing we could talk about is redirection. We could redirect our errant thoughts by being constantly vigilant and using the practice of mindfulness. So this week, what I was doing some experiments, I had a patient who asked a million questions and was not reasonable. And even though a lot of the questions didn't have answers, he was demanding answers to questions that didn't have an answer. And I took my time. I did my breathing. I stayed focused. I stayed mindful. And I was able to achieve, I think, a good visitation with this patient, and actually an enjoyable visitation. Whereas the person that I was becoming would have gotten extraordinarily, would have had this feeling of, I don't know what word you want to use, just being stressed and just being out of balance, and I didn't want that. I wanted to feel very peaceful, and I wanted to feel very present with that patient. Realization. We need to realize that one day we are no longer going to be healers. We will lose the privilege of caring for the sick, the honor of being entrusted with another person's life. And finally, Angel, and probably the most important roads to getting back is regret. You have to realize that you do not ever want to regret any squandered time, even if it's one interaction or one possibility lost to touch another's heart. The loss of that ecstasy that we have as healers to take away pain and suffering and cure a fatal disease. We're not going to have that forever. And if we just squander even one interaction, we're going to have a regret. And I do realize now, Angel, that every visit is not an infringement, nor a chore, nor a burden, but rather every visit is an opportunity to savor and appreciate and cherish every patient, and to be that healer that develops these relationships with your patients, that creates these bonds and these friendships, that advocates for their patients and stands up for them and demands excellent care from all of the providers, even if it means that you might lose or burn a bridge or lose a friendship. You always have to put that advocacy first above yourself. You want to be that physician that's available and always accessible to your patients 24/7. You want to be understandable. You want to bring yourself, you want to break out of that. We're going to do a reverse Superman. So instead of breaking out of your regular clothes and putting on your cape, we have to break out of that stiff white coat and become human and allow a patient, whether they're a farmer or a policeman or fireman or someone who owns a grocery store or who pumps gas or an engineer from MIT, it doesn't matter. You have to be able to relate to them on their level. And you have to, in conclusion, You have to be a slayer of fear. And the way that you can slay fear is by giving your patients the time and your complete attention through mindfulness. Angel Santana, your thoughts about today's podcast?
I think it was a great way to understand that those 6 ways and the 6 key factors that you listed toward the end can not only be utilized in our daily life, but it can be utilized in our work environment. And it all depends on how we put those points into practice. I want to touch base on the word mindfulness. There was a quote that I actually know of, and it's funny when you were asking me for the definition, I struggled with it for a second because it came back to my mind, and then I remembered it. It was mindfulness creates centered awareness. When you do one thing at a time, you're guaranteed excellent results. So focus on one thing at a time. And I think that's really what this overall podcast was about. And I want to thank you for being for humbling yourself yet again, and showing us the human side of you, rather than what most people will assume, which is, putting that DR first, and making an assumption that you're not just like everyone else.
Yeah, and then I think that it really speaks. Thank you, Angel, for those kind words. I think it really speaks to what we're trying to do here on the podcast. And if you've been a listener, you've noticed that our introduction is a little different, and it's a little different because I wanted to be clear on what we were trying to do here. So we are a podcast to help the survivor thriver manage their survivorship and all of the trials and tribulations that you go through. But there's a second side to our coin, or to the flip side of our CROC Nation, to our CROC podcast and our CROC organization. And that's also to help your doctors and your nurses and your care team, your cancer care team, manage their humanity. Because at the end of the day, that's what we are. We're humans. We're not robots. We're not machines. We're not perfect. And I think we balance that nicely, Angel, in that, maybe half of our podcasts are directly toward helping the survivor with advice, or having a survivor on as a guest. And I think the other half is the human side of medicine, and how we can help our colleagues be better for our survivors. So with that being said, Angel, we'll end this podcast with our prayer and our well wishes. Everyone out there who is surviving cancer and is suffering and has had a bad experience with a practitioner, who have felt unheard, who have felt that they were not given the time that they needed, not given the education or the understanding of what's going on, to have a practitioner who had the quote unquote 1 foot out the door, or the 2-minute visit, or just being left without being able to know who to call if there was a problem, or what to do, and not really being properly prepared for your survivorship. I want to let you know that I hear you, and I never wanted to be the person that felt that I was that guy, or I was that person, or I was that healer who did not give you all that you deserve and all that you're entitled to. So what my prayer today is that all of our practitioners and cancer caregivers recognize their humanity. And one of the things that we learn in mindfulness is to not be judgmental. You don't have to judge yourself or be angry at yourself or kick yourself, but do recognize that you are straying, and make the changes that you need to be the doctor, the healer, the nurse that you want to be, or that you strive to be. And we wish you all, our survivors, our caregivers, nothing but the best, and a very long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. God bless you. God be with you. Peace.
Hey, CROC Nation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast to your friends. Visit our website, crocvip.com. We would love to hear your feedback.